Good evening once again. I am Stephanie Ruhle, joining you, travel delayed, from Miami. It is the 24th day of Donald Trump's war on Iran, and the president earlier today backed off his threat to attack the power plants that serve millions of people. Trump said that he would go through with those attacks if Iran didn't open up the Strait of Hormuz by tonight. Here's what Trump said changed his mind.
They want to make a deal, and we are very willing to make a deal. It's got to be a good deal, and it's got to be no more wars, no more nuclear weapons. They're not going to have nuclear weapons anymore. They're agreeing to that.
Speaking with Mr. President.
A top person. Don't forget, we've wiped out the leadership phase 1, phase 2, and largely phase 3. But we're dealing with the man who I believe is the most respected and the leader. It's a little tough. We've wiped out everybody.
Is that the Supreme Leader?
No, not the Supreme Leader. We don't.
Not much trouble.
Well, nobody heard of the second Supreme Leader, the son. There'll also be a very serious form of a regime change. Now, in all fairness, everybody's been killed from the regime. They're really starting off. There's automatically a regime change, but we're dealing with some people that I find to be very reasonable, very solid. The people within know who they are.
Okay, so Trump says that because of productive talks with an unnamed Iranian leader, he will not attack their power plant for a total of 5 days. But here's the thing. Iran says there are no such talks. On social media, an Iranian official called the announcement of talks fake news meant to manipulate the oil markets, and that Trump's comments did rally the markets, of course, and we know it pushed down the price of oil, which is what Iran said Trump was trying to do. Well, here at home, tonight the Senate voted to confirm Senator Markwayne Mullin as the new Secretary of Homeland Security. The vote was largely along party lines, no surprise, but 2 Democrats voted yes and 1 Republican voted no. And speaking of DHS, this is important because it's impacting all of us who are traveling. Some Republicans are starting to get worried about the political fallout from the department's shutdown. It has been going on for more than 5 weeks, and the TSA lines at some major airports are now several hours long. The president turned down a pitch from Senate Republicans to fund most of DHS except for ICE, which, of course, would restore funding for TSA, which so many people are demanding. So essentially, they had a deal. Republicans had it, Democrats had it, and the president turned it down. We should also note that negotiations are still happening, so there is hope. But the president also said today that Republicans should not make any DHS deal with Democrats until they help to pass the Save America Act. That is, of course, the one that would require voter ID and proof of citizenship when registering. Right now, there is no clear way forward for that thing to pass. So in the meantime, the president has sent ICE to a whole bunch of airports, apparently to somehow help the TSA situation. Border czar Tom Homan told MSNOW that ICE is already at 14 major airports, and there will be more soon. All right, it is time now to get smarter, so let's bring in our leadoff panel tonight. Luke Broadwater is here, Pulitzer Prize-winning White House correspondent for The New York Times. David Drucker joins us, senior writer at The Dispatch, and Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, a retired commander of U.S. Army Europe. His new book, If I Don't Return, A Father's Wartime Journal, is out now, and I can assure you it is a must-read. All right, Mr. Broadwater, we are turning to you first. The president says one thing, Iran says another. What do we actually know about what's going on?
Well, we do know that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are talking to someone in Iran. They've had talks that have gone on today, that went on yesterday. They expect to meet with somebody soon. I think the question is, are the people on the other end of these calls empowered to actually negotiate and to make decisions? The Trump administration has been very vague about who they are talking with. Obviously, you hear the statements from various Iranian officials denying any talks are taking place or that there is significant progress in any talks. So it's really unclear. Even the Trump administration says they are not sure whether there is internal communication between the different people in Iran. And so, this may all be Trump puffing up some very, very minor conversations into something to drive down the price of oil. Obviously, the president is very concerned about the economy and the price of oil right now. But it's really hard to know what to make of these things right now. Other than I think it is an indication Donald Trump is feeling the pressure of the politics of this moment. He's looking for a way to try to bring this war to an end, and so he's pointing to these talks.
Okay, well, it's easier said than done. We talk a lot about what the president says versus what he does, David, but words mean a lot more during a war. This isn't just about oil markets. This is our national security. This is foreign policy. These are American lives.
Yes, that's true. But we know that the president is most susceptible to market pressure, right? I mean, he doesn't have to worry too much about pressure from Republicans, at least in primary season. And we are in primary season as of early March. And obviously, and he's shown that he doesn't really, care about criticism from Democrats. And that's fine so far as it goes. But what he is cognizant of is pressure from the financial markets. Gas prices have been on the rise. The stock markets have been volatile, and over the last few days of last week, we're headed in a negative direction. And so what he was able to do with his announcement that talks were underway and that he was postponing certain kinds of attacks was to precipitate a rally of the markets and a lowering of oil prices, or at least futures. And that is often what the president will do when he finds himself in a bind. So I think the question now is, how legitimate were these talks? Because everything is so vague. Who was he talking to? He wouldn't quite say. Maybe he couldn't say, but he wouldn't quite say. The Iranians are claiming that no such talks existed. They're not credible. But the president is not necessarily credible in this regard. And so I think, over the next few days of this coming week, we're going to find out exactly what's what, and then that'll give us a better picture of where we are. But, I think what the president's trying to manage here is, our military end goals with some of the financial repercussions, at least short term, of the war.
Yeah, and it sounds like he could be misrepresenting the war in favor of ensuring that financial markets don't tank. But let's talk about the military general, because the president backed off and he gave Iran this 5-day deadline. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that thousands of Marines are going to arrive in the Middle East the same day the deadline expires. That's according to 2 officials. Where do you see everything going from here?
Well, first of all, the number of Marines and even the additional Army forces that have been rumored to be heading there are not near enough to what needs to happen in that area if you're talking about a military campaign. There is no end state to a military campaign. I hate to bring that up. The end state is based on the politics, and that's a combination of national power, diplomacy, economics, military, and information. We haven't seen that. What we've seen is military battles over the last couple of weeks, trying to execute a campaign that will end to an end state. But when you hear the president talk, as you just showed on the film just now, Stephanie, and then you compare it to what the Iranian leaders are talking and saying that this isn't going on and it's fake news, we're talking about 2 sides that really we're not getting any information or that we can trust. I mean, we haven't trusted the Iranian regime for 47 years. This president, my take in listening to that film clip you just showed was a lot like my kids when they were trying to get out of something and they didn't have quite the right answers to provide to the press in the case of the president. So we don't really know what's going on in terms of the military operations. But back to your original question, when you're talking about 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, the MEWs, it's 2,500 apiece, 5,000 total. That's a small force, Stephanie. That's less than an Army brigade. I don't know what you can do with that force in an area the size of a country that's 3 times the size of the state of Iraq. What are you going to do? If you're talking about taking over Karg Island, that's a big piece of real estate, too, with a lot of oil and energy equipment that Marines probably don't know how to handle. There's a picture of it right there. It's a supply post. So you can seize and possibly secure the area, but then what are you going to do? You're then targeted by Iranian drones and other actions that they've proven themselves to be able to continue to use, even as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense have said they're almost all out of capabilities. They're still firing a lot of rockets and missiles at different places and using the drones to great effect.
General, you recently wrote about the remaining threats posed by Iran, and just this weekend, the State Department issued a worldwide security threat for Americans traveling anywhere. What kind of threats are you most worried about?
I've been quite surprised, Stephanie, over the last couple of days that we haven't seen any attacks by proxies that are significant, or even any homeland security threats that we know of. Again, we're not getting a whole lot of information from our government, from either the FBI or DHS, because they're so worried about putting ICE in airports that aren't doing anything. So I'm very concerned that threat levels probably are rising, both overseas and in the continental United States. We just don't know what they are. And those could range anywhere from cyber attacks to some type of terrorist attack to disruption of services. So, again, I'm truthfully a little bit surprised that we haven't seen anything significant just yet.
David, Trump's first interview about these alleged talks with Iran was with CNBC, an audience that's 100% professional and retail investors, right? You were mentioning it before, but I want to underscore it. What does it tell us about the priorities of this president and this war? Is that's the audience he wanted to speak to first? That's what matters most to him in his mind. And then just hours later, Iran called him out for it.
Yeah, well, look, we know that the president isn't always susceptible to the kind of political pressure that's traditional, right? I mean, if you're looking at the broader electorate, right, independent voters, things like that, that doesn't necessarily change his mind. He is very susceptible to market pressure. So it'd make perfect sense they would call into CNBC and try and assure traders and assure the financial markets that everything was fine. He was negotiating everything, and that there was going to be a sort of calm in the war while they dealt with things that had to do with the energy markets and things like that, right? So that was entirely predictable and entirely understandable, and that's how the president reacts, right? He doesn't. Again, what we have seen over the last year is that he doesn't necessarily respond to broader American political pressure, by which we mean voters, right? He is concerned about where his base is, his political base, and he is concerned about the stock market and the financial markets and the bond markets. And we have seen that repeatedly. And that made how he was handling things today both predictable but very understandable, because that's the way he operates. And so, the proof is going to be here, and the issue is going to be what happens over the next couple of days, right? Because if there are legitimate negotiations occurring, then we should be able to see developments, and we should be able to see whoever has some bit of authority in Iran react or confirm these negotiations. And if not, then, we're going to have to see presumably a plan B by the president as he tries to sort of tamp everything down. Because I think one of the things that, he's been most proud of, and that he's been able to claim credit for legitimately, even as higher prices have continued to be an issue, is lower gas prices, lower energy prices. And of course, worldwide, because of this war and all of the fallout, gas prices are higher, energy prices are higher. And so, let's see where this goes in the coming days, but that's clearly something he's concerned about.
And let's be clear, before the war started, you had people across this country facing skyrocketing electricity bills over the last 6 months. New topic. We saw ICE now at major airports. Tom Homan said they're at 14 different airports. And I want to share a picture that we saw today, right? This one getting a whole lot of attention. It's from Atlanta. It shows an ICE agent scrolling on his phone, looking at his phone, while in the background, long lines of travelers stuck outside waiting. Luke, I got a very simple question. Do we know what ICE is actually doing at these airports? Like, what job functions that TSA fulfill, that they have been doing for weeks and not getting paid for, are these ICE agents now, who I don't know that they have any training for it, are going to be doing?
Yeah, well, this is a situation where this was Donald Trump's idea. He's been boastful about this great idea he had that he would send ICE in to do the job of TSA. The problem is the ICE agents aren't trained to even work the X-ray machine or to scan bags or do things like that. It's been suggested by Tom Homan that they can watch some of the exits, and that, you know, TSA agents, if they were watching the exits, could then go help with the lines. But all the reports we're hearing is they're mainly milling about and walking around the airports. So it's unclear how they're helping the situation at the airports right now without the proper training to really screen or look at the bags or check passports or the various functions that TSA is trained to do. So, you know, but the president's very pleased with this idea. He said it was such a good idea. It was as good as inventing the paperclip. And so he's quite happy that he has dispatched ICE to the airports.
As good as inventing the paperclip. Luke, then also tell us what is happening on the Hill, because there was chatter that they were going to get something done. I saw John Kennedy saying he and Ted Cruz agreed with Democrats. They had a plan to fund DHS, everything except ICE. And Trump said, no, not going to happen.
Yeah, that was the state of play as of yesterday. John Thune went to the president and said, essentially, we can fund the rest of Homeland Security. The Democrats will go for it. What do you think, Mr. President? And Trump rejected that. He said he wanted the SAVE Act to pass first, or the Save America Act, as they're calling it. I do understand that there's been some talks just recently, and that maybe the president indicated privately to some of the Republican senators that he was now more open to that idea. But he rejected it just yesterday. So it did seem like there was the senators have some movement on this issue to go ahead and fund the rest of Homeland Security.
Well, it could move as the pressure mounts. Gentlemen, thank you for starting us off this evening. Coming up later in the program, the Supreme Court is set to decide if mail-in ballots that arrive after Election Day should be counted, and it could have a major impact on this year's midterm election. But very first, what are we doing after the break? You know what time it is. Money, Power, Politics. How Trump's social media habits are affecting the stock market. It is time now for Money, Power, Politics. The Dow surged more than 630 points after President Trump announced the United States would delay further strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure amid what he called, quote, very good talks with Tehran. But of course, Iran has publicly denied any negotiations were taking place. The president's announcement arrived just 15 minutes after a sharp jump in volume across both the S&P and oil futures, a burst in activity with no obvious trigger. Now, I'm not drawing any conclusions, but that certainly seems strange. So let's discuss. My friend Justin Wolfers joins me now. He's a professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan. And I want to welcome Stephanie Link for the very first time to the 11th hour. She's Chief Investment Officer at Hightower. You probably recognize her from CNBC's Halftime Report and Squawk Box. Stephanie, welcome to the show. We're going to start with the hardest question for you. There is no clear evidence connecting the president's announcement to that sudden volume spike, but this is a very odd pattern. What can you tell us?
Well, it is great to be here, Stephanie. Thank you so much for the invitation. Look, I think we all kind of thought this day was going to be different. When we started off the day, the futures were down 500, at least when I woke up, and then about 6:30, then all of a sudden the futures rallied pretty strongly. And then we got the tweet, or then we got the Truth Social post. This is what we've come to get used to with this administration. We have to wake up and we have to look at Twitter and we have to look at Truth Social first. And I will say, headed in, though, we were very oversold. And the sentiment was very negative. So I look at this thing called Fear and Greed Index. It comes out every day and it just gives you a number. And the number 0 is really extreme pessimism. 100 is the most optimistic you can possibly be. So we entered today at 17. And just to put that into context for you, that Last year, Liberation Day, we got to 3. And COVID, we got to 12. So we're on that scale of really negative sentiment. And over the weekend, we were hearing all kinds of reports that this war is going to go on much longer than expected. And that's the thing the market is trying to grapple with, really, that if the longer it goes, can the economy hang in there? Because right now, the economy is actually pretty good at 2.5% growth. But the longer this goes, the higher the oil prices, the higher commodity prices, it's not great. So the fact that it today could possibly be that it's a little bit less, that's what it rallied on.
But of course, the spike in volume came before the president's announcement. So even if you read the president's Truth Social post, even if you read Twitter, it didn't matter. There was a spike 15 minutes before. Justin, markets were looking at another day of potential losses before the president's post. He makes the announcement, boom, oil drops, stock prices climb. What is your take? Because even if I was Encyclopedia Brown reading every single tweet, I wouldn't be ahead of the market like all those other folks were.
I just love the Encyclopedia Brown reference. That takes me back, mate. And you get to the last page and you find out who done it. And it should have been in front of you the whole time. Why aren't my kids reading that? You know, actually, almost every time one of these big events happens, in fact, there was talk of this before 9/11 as well, some smarty finds somewhere where there's a little bit too much volume and we start to tell these stories. I tend to be a little bit cynical about them, actually, Steph, because there are so many different ways and so many different places we could look. For instance, this one happened 15 minutes before the tweet. Well, what's the right window to be looking? Is it 5 minutes before, 30 minutes before? You know, if I was the president's son-in-law, I'd probably do it the night before. And so the thing is, there are so many places to look for mischief. It's fairly easy to see it even when maybe it's not there. I'm not defending anyone in the White House. I'm just saying statistically it's very difficult to pick up what's unusual versus the usual ups and downs of finance.
Mm-hmm. I want to level set with where things actually stand, though. Put sort of the tweets and the predictions aside, because the head of the International Energy Agency said today that the global economy still faces a major threat from this war. The CEO of Chevron said the impact of the war has not even been fully priced into the oil market yet, and we know the Strait of Hormuz is still effectively closed, with U.S. Maritime Trade Operations Center warning yesterday that the threat for shipping is still at a critically high level. So, Justin, Trump's announcement could paint a rosy picture. There may be better days ahead. Let's hope and pray there are. But are we any closer to being out of the woods?
At some deep level, no. Let me give you an analogy here, which I think it feels like we're following a similar path. We had the trade war. The president thought he'd beat up the Chinese and all of a sudden discovered that we had a unique vulnerability, that the Chinese had rare earth minerals that we needed. The Chinese probably knew that all along, and that put a brake on the president believing that the United States was holding all the cards. Well, the one thing that the past couple of weeks has made clear is Iran holds a lot of cards with the Strait of Hormuz. They may or may not open shipping, but its understanding and the world's understanding of that vulnerability now is, you know, it's wide open for all of us to see. No one's widening the Strait of Hormuz, so therefore that vulnerability remains pretty much forever.
Steph, to your last point, the underlying economy is strong, but almost 40% of the total market cap of the S&P is just a small handful of firms, right? We talk about the Magnificent Seven all the time, and the war in Iran is making the market especially jittery. How concerning is that?
Well, we've had a very concentrated market for the last 3 years. We grew last year, the S&P was up 18%, the year before that up 24%, and the year before that up 23%. By the way, that's totally not normal. The average long term is 7.7%. So we've had some good years, but the majority of the gains, to your point, were Mag 7, technology, and communication services. Those together are almost 35% weighting in the S&P 500. So if you had those right and you were involved in those, you did pretty well. If you took a more diversified stance in owning, a basket of the S&P 500 stocks at large, you wouldn't have done as well. But I think over time, you do want to have diversification. The reason those stocks and those sectors did well, though, Stephanie, is because these companies were free cash flow machines with huge moats, limited competition, And they're actually investing to spend all this CapEx. I mean, the Mag 7 are going to spend $761 billion.
Steph, I got to interrupt you. We don't have a CapEx audience, so just remember our audience. We don't have professional investors watching this show. So let's leave that over here. But with all the uncertainty in the United States and the global economy, everybody is saying if they do have some money to invest, where should they put it? You are about to participate in CNBC's live Women of Wealth event. What is your message to those attendees?
Yeah, I'm really excited for the Wealth for Women event. We know over the next 20 to 25 years, you're going to see massive wealth transfer of $1 trillion to women in the next generation group. And women have come a long way. They have gone to college and higher education, but we still only really have a small amount of women that are doing their own investments, and they're going to have to learn. And so 5 of my colleagues from CNBC, we're going to get together. We're going to have 4 different salons, 4 different rooms with small groups and we're going to talk about investments and ideas and that sort of thing so that they can ask questions and then they can be with each other and ask questions. Because that's the number one thing I get when I visit with clients is I have a dumb question. There are no dumb questions. And I think that there's a lot that they can learn. So we're really very excited and very thankful to CNBC for doing this with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Justin, my brother. I will see you soon. If you would like to attend, you can get tickets to CNBC's Wealth for Women event on May 28th. Just scan the QR code on your screen right now. Thank you both for being here. When we return, several states count mail-in ballots that arrive after Election Day as long as they are postmarked. But that grace period could end thanks to a lawsuit that has landed itself at the Supreme Court. Mark Joseph Stern, no doubt, is fired up, and he's here to break it all down. Today, the Supreme Court heard arguments in a case that could upend mail-in voting throughout the country. The High Court is now considering whether to overturn a Mississippi law that allows mail-in ballots postmarked by Election Day to be counted if they are received within 5 business days after the election. The decision could impact Mississippi and at least 18 other states and territories, and it is expected to come down this summer, which is, of course, just a few months before the midterm elections. And it is worth noting that the president has been against mail-in voting and falsely linked it to what he claimed was fraud in the 2020 election. Mark Joseph Stern is the expert on the subject. He's the senior writer covering courts and the law at Slate, and he joins us now. Educate us, my friend. How did this case end up at the Supreme Court?
So the Republican National Committee kicked off this case by suing Mississippi over this law that allows for the counting of late arriving ballots. And the lower court, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, a very far-right reactionary court, sided with the Republicans and against Mississippi, struck down the Mississippi law, said that these statutes are unlawful, and really guaranteed Supreme Court review because we can't have rules that late arriving ballots count in some parts of the country but they're illegal in others. I will note the irony here. Mississippi is a deep red state. It's run by Republicans. This lawsuit forced a bunch of Republican politicians to defend these ballot laws, and they investigated them. They did the legwork, and what they found is that these laws are completely unremarkable. They are not creating any opportunity for fraud, and they defended them quite robustly all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Well, today's reporting indicates the conservative justices are leaning toward restricting late arrival ballots. What were the most important things said during today's arguments? Because this is something people just assume, oh, this is the way we vote. It's going to be this way forevermore. But that might not be the case.
Unfortunately, I think some of the conservative justices have been watching a little bit too much Fox News. We had Justice Sam Alito and Justice Neil Gorsuch strongly suggest that counting these late ballots would lead to voter fraud, that it would somehow taint or corrupt elections. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who could be a critical vote here, was also very skeptical of these laws. He suggested that these late ballots could flip the outcome of an election and cause people to lose faith in the declared winner. Similarly, we had Justice Thomas, who we know does not believe mail voting is secure. He's railed against it in the past, suggesting that these laws are going to cause some kind of problem or even chaos in American elections. I mean, I can't stress enough, there is no evidence for any of those propositions. If anything, the opposite is true. These laws have prevented chaos by ensuring there's not some mad scramble in the final days of an election for people to try to get their ballots in places like California, Mississippi, the District of Columbia. People know if you drop it in the mail close to the election, even on election day, it'll still get counted. You don't need to worry. And there has been no evidence, zero evidence that anyone has ever used this system to commit fraud or otherwise try to taint an election. So these concerns that the justices were raising, they have no basis in reality, and they also really have nothing to do with the law, because the legal question here is not about fraud. It's whether Congress required states to cut off all ballots that come in after Election Day, and it just didn't.
Wouldn't this also have a huge impact on all the members of the military who are serving abroad who vote this way?
Yeah, absolutely. So all told, 30 states count some late arriving ballots. There are about 15 or 16 that only count overseas and military ballots that come in after the election. And when Congress passed the laws that govern those ballots, it actually kind of incorporated these deadlines into the federal statutes. It seems that lawmakers were aware that a lot of states allowed for these ballots to come in late. Obviously, it's difficult to get your ballot from a military base, from a foreign country, into the United States. There can be problems, there can be delays that are completely beyond the voters' control. So Congress deferred to the state's decision about when the ballots had to arrive. And so it's quite odd now to have the Republican National Committee come in and say, no, no, no. Congress actually insisted that states cut off all ballots the moment Election Day is over, and everything that comes in after is illegal. That would mean disenfranchising many of our men and women in uniform. It would disproportionately affect military voters. And it's something that the plaintiffs here, the Republican National Committee, tried to run away from because they know it looks terrible. And they know that, of course, we do not have military members using this system to try to commit fraud. They're just trying to participate in democracy while stationed overseas.
Okay, before we go, here's something else that looks terrible, or at least questionable. This comes as the president is pushing for the passage of the SAVE Act. We have seen over and over conservatives attack liberals for using the courts to accomplish things they cannot get done in Congress. Is that what the conservatives are doing right here, right now, in front of us?
Absolutely right. One version of the SAVE Act would explicitly ban states from counting these late arriving ballots. And if that passes into law through the democratic process, fine. Congress has the power to do it. But it hasn't done so yet. There is no statute that actually says these ballots must be nullified. And so what I see here is the Republican Party saying, look, we aren't going to get this passed into law in all likelihood. It's not going to get past a Senate filibuster. So let's just try to smuggle it in under the guise of judicial review. That is exactly what the conservative justices have been warning us against doing for years, saying, no, you have to go to the Capitol, you have to go through the democratic process, vote on this, convince your fellow citizens it's a good idea. And here they're using the cheat code to try to get their favorite policy into law. And of course, it's especially gruesome because this is a policy that would disenfranchise people and make it harder for them to participate in democracy in the future.
Mark, you always make us smarter, and that is the goal of this show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
The president's new plan to override state laws on artificial intelligence. We're going to dig into it because it could undercut